My name's Andrew Tennell. I'm the VP and head of product here at Embrace. I've been at Embrace just a few months. Before that, I was the VP of observability, including APM, mobile infrastructure, et cetera, at New Relic, which is a major observability provider. So really looking forward to talking contextually today about what Embrace does that's really incredibly special in the market segment. With that, we'll get started to why we are here. You care about the success of your mobile applications. They used to be supplemental customer touch points, but many of your businesses now were born mobile. And with others, we're seeing incredible growth and adoption and revenue stemming from a company's mobile presence. What used to take a car ride and a visit to a brick and mortar storefront to interact with your brand has now moved into the palm of your customer's hand. I think you've seen this with the pandemic and the rise of mobile pickup or engagement with brands. And last year we continue to see an incredible rise in the engagement with mobile app through digital transactions. In fact, 70% of digital transactions took place on a mobile device. Some of those experiences were entirely digital, but others like in-store pickup and loyalty programs are your brand's way of maintaining a connection with your customers. Mobile presents an incredible opportunity to remain top of mind and connected with your customers, but it also means there's a ton of risk because bad experiences don't just leave a customer dissatisfied, but they might mean they uninstall your app, and as a result, they disconnect from your brand entirely. For many years now, starting with the e-commerce revolution in the early 2000s, companies have been investing heavily in backend infrastructure to support their digital products. No doubt all of you have heard the words digital transformation. I think that's been indicative of kind of the rise of the internet as the place that your brands primarily interact with your customers. As a result, that digital transformation has resulted in many companies moving to virtualized infrastructure first from data centers and bare metal, but then containers and Kubernetes, as well as microservices and cloud native architectures, even things like serverless. And that was all in the name of achieving resiliency, availability, and scalability. Team organizations have evolved too. They've changed to support rapid deployments and the rise of DevOps. And most of you probably have a suite of tools from monitoring, logging to security that help your engineers support that digital transformation. But along the way, a lot of companies have also neglected to support their mobile engineering teams with the right tools. If your only insight into mobile experiences is through the lens of a few metrics alongside basic crash and error data, then you're treating that incredibly valuable, arguably your most valuable touch point, as most digital transactions flow through it, much worse than the backend infrastructure supporting it. Instead of the rich, dynamic, valuable, irreplaceable opportunity to engage your customers that mobile is, it really risks becoming an afterthought because it's not supported properly. In this webinar, we'll cover why relying on existing observability tools for monitoring in mobile is not a recipe for success in this increasingly competitive mobile landscape. And we'll also cover where you should be investing for long-term success to support your mobile engineering teams. So what's our agenda? First, we're going to talk about the shortcomings of existing tools that slow down your mobile-first initiatives. Second, we're going to talk about the top 5 objectives to promote product optimization and innovation. And third, we're going to talk about how the future of mobile will unlock workforce productivity and revenue potential in your businesses. And finally, the X factor we think you need to succeed in a mobile-first world. To start, we'll cover how existing observability solutions are not built for mobile and the data gaps many customers have when it comes to troubleshooting issues for optimizing for mobile application success. So first things first. Existing observability solutions are focused on infrastructure monitoring and application monitoring, primarily in the data center and cloud. The flexibility of the cloud to adapt to new software delivery workloads has really created the need for robust ways to monitor these increasingly complex systems. I talked a lot about microservice architectures that could be 30, 40, 100, 1,000 different services, depending upon the specific request that a customer had. And that's for good reason. These systems serve internal and external users, often with lots of processing complexity across inventory systems or internal applications, the web applications you serve, etc. A bug or bad performance in a single service can result in wide swaths of your customers being really heavily impacted in your entire business instantly. And because of that, really, in the late 2000s, entire new classes of software got built that were delivered as software as a service, primarily around application performance monitoring and infrastructure monitoring. And those were built to answer questions like, what and where are transactions failing? You have a request in an initial service that does X. Where along the chain of dependencies is it failing? What and where are transactions running slower than they should be? If you have an SLA or a service promise out to your web applications for a particular method or API endpoint, when is your point of investigating it? How do you proactively build in performance? And what dependency? Is it a bad database request? Is it downstream API calls that are causing it to run slow? What's the health of my infrastructure? I need to see at a glance across all of my services which of the transactions are failing or succeeding, or which apps are healthy or not. And do we need more capacity, or are we over-provisioned? Is the lack of available host infrastructure causing degraded application performance? And what are what's the behavior of the overall hosts? All of these concern monitoring the performance of the machines and services that are under your control. But this is only part of the picture. Traditional web applications in a browser are generally very thin clients. Certainly the rise of React has created a little bit more of a stateful application experience inside your browser, but traditionally they're very thin. But modern apps on your phone are really visual experiences. They often carry embedded business logic, and they rely on compared to your laptop or desktop, rely on relatively limited processing power of a handheld device. That could have limited to no internet connection, or a number of other things going on, including devices with highly variable amounts of storage, memory, and processing power. So let's cover an example of how this limited visibility can impact you if you're relying on just backend monitoring to know if your app is having a problem. You have a backend that powers 30 to 40 different systems spanning internal services, web storefronts, a host of who knows what else. It could be contact centers, etc. And finally, your mobile app. You have defined service thresholds that must be exceeded before your engineering teams or your IT ops team or your SRE team will investigate an issue. And let's say your backend team will only be notified when a service transaction has greater than a 5% error rate across all clients. So you're looking at a particular API endpoint, you have an alert and says, if we have greater than a 5% error rate within a 5-minute period, go wake up an engineer. Everything is working fine and looking healthy, but what happens when there's an issue on the mobile app? So we're going to talk about a 400 error. So if the failing calls were 400s, from the perspective of your backend, they're not actually seeing an elevated error rate. In this case, it's a client issue. It could be a validation error as an example. Nobody's generally getting woken up for this. Most teams won't alert on 400 issues. And that might be the right behavior for your service, except mobile applications, it's non-trivial to deploy a hotfix to support a new API spec that maybe didn't have backward compatibility. You could see how this is possible when a service team deploys an API change, assuming everyone's made changes to their clients to support it, but maybe the mobile team didn't get the ticket or didn't get the memo or was planning on rolling it out at a different time. They can't just instantly hotfix it. It has to go out to app stores for approvals, etc. And so a relatively large number of users, all unique to your mobile device, might get impacted. I like to call these problems not your fault, but your problem. It's a 400 error, so as far as you see it, your service is behaving as you expected, but it's very much your problem because a large swath of customers who could be attempting to do something that's very valuable to your business aren't succeeding. But let's say the issue is a 500 error. So in this case, even though your service is failing and it's returning an internal server error, the traffic volume coming from your mobile app could easily not be enough to trigger any alerts. When systems get large enough and you're serving enough tenants, and you build your monitoring around error rates crossing these specific thresholds across all tenants, you might not instrument an alert for an individual client. And so if your backend monitoring can't effectively isolate issues within your mobile apps, then surely you've got some mobile monitoring in place that can. Except in reality, we find that most current observability solutions for mobile are limited and fragmented. And this limited visibility can impact you if you're relying on just backend monitoring and lightweight mobile monitoring to solve this problem. Most companies are using free and low fidelity tooling to monitor the health of their mobile applications. Each has limited coverage, meaning they can focus on collecting specific types of data. They might batch and sample them in different groupings. They often lack depth. For example, you could have an SDK that focuses just on crash reporting and errors, while another focuses on pulling in analytical data. Another could focus on logging. And maybe they have different rules around how they pull data. Maybe some are real time for crash data, while others take many hours to give you the overall rate. And so it creates limitations around what the questions you can ask and when you can ask them. And broadly speaking, I mean, the industry, the mobile development industry has kind of settled on crashes and errors being good enough. But there's a lot of sources of customer frustration that aren't just crashes and errors. I mean, those are the most fatal issues. We'll talk about these later. For example, we'll talk about latency and on-device performance and animations or when processing data. But it's our firm belief that there's a lot more going on that existing tooling broadly doesn't solve for. So this, fragmentation and lack of connectivity in these tool sets, it ultimately really means that your teams have slower mean time to detect issue and slower mean time to resolution. And depending upon your app design, this could mean the difference between instantly responding to an issue that is impacting a flash sale on your mobile app so that you can flip a feature flag, as an example, back to where it should be. Or it could mean just a lack of data and that dreaded response from engineering teams, which is we can't reproduce the issue. Companies are attempting to piece together all of this visibility by stitching together multiple disparate data sets as well. And ultimately, this introduces incredible complexity, increased size, the danger of an incredible number of dependencies into their mobile applications. We deal with customers all of the time that have more than 50 different SDKs in them. I mean, some are analytical SDKs pulling everything from crashes to basic performance data. Some are various, Apple developer kits for access to certain APIs. Some are user analytics. But all of that data is kind of flowing to different teams that are then using that data in different ways. And it's incredibly hard for people to build a cohesive view around what's going on. So what's the problem with this approach? Ultimately, this presents a huge challenge because there's no data consistency. Teams end up getting different answers at different intervals, data sent at different time buckets, and the data reflects different user cohorts. And the results in these disparate data sets likely don't tell the whole story. You have no way to necessarily see what's exactly happening to a given user. Maybe your analytical data tells a story in one way, and then you have no connection to the underlying technical behavior for that user. You have no way to understand exactly what happened in any given session, and no way to view all sessions where a specific issue happened. And ideally, this is across all telemetry types connected. So let's go over a few examples here around what types of issues existing observability solutions fail to address. So the first we're going to cover is latency. The user perspective is different than what the backend measures. I mean, we all know this, and you've likely been members of or seen responses from server-side teams that say, it's the user's internet connectivity. A network call can be processed and sent to the client almost instantly from your server side once you receive the request, but your user's average connectivity or even large payloads could mean a lot of latency to actually receive and process the data. I mean, you can imagine somebody who's not on Wi-Fi, has maybe is in a place where they don't have access to LTE or 4G. A large payload is going to take quite a bit of time for the client to actually download and process. Let's also talk about network congestion. Your network call could be competing against too many other calls on the device, some of which are from third-party SDKs, like ad networks or user analytics, resulting in a lot of network connection on the device. To your single service on the back end, everything looks just fine. Or heavy data processing. We talked about that for a while. Not only could you have large payloads that take a while to download, but depending upon the complexity of the data, your user's device may not actually even have access to the compute power or the memory to properly process through that payload and render the outcome to a user. Another common issue we see are connection errors, and these usually result in things like large numbers of retries. So from a user perspective, this is really latency to them because they don't see the retry behavior. It just appears that your request is taking a really long time. Depending upon how this happens, whether it's like device queuing or a lack of ability to actually connect and make an outbound request, your back-end monitoring might not even see all of the attempts to talk to it. It might just see the one successful request it made. And transactions can fail for any variety of reasons, including both technical failures and user-initiated cancellations. And we want to talk a little bit about some of those reasons as well. So first would be like a canceled and duplicate purchase. So let's imagine a scenario where you have a really slow purchase request. So this is a request to the /checkout endpoint on your API. A user here is trying to make a purchase, but if it's taking too long to complete, the user could get really frustrated and assume it's just stuck, right? To them, it's broken. There's this, handy thing that users can do in what appears to be stuck situation where they force quit the app. But unwittingly, your backend services have still completed the checkout. And instead, they have just opened up the website, maybe on their mobile phone, maybe on their desktop, and they went and completed the purchase or did something else. And now they've accidentally made 2 purchases. And the outcome here is that you have customer support tickets about duplicate orders or why they never, the fact that they didn't think their order completed on their mobile device, or maybe they go and cancel it. And if it's a digital fulfillment item, it results in thrash and cost to your organization. And really, you have very limited visibility as to why this keeps happening. You could also end up having problems with payment providers. It's not uncommon to have specific vendors be the source of errors. And these can be especially difficult to track down if they're localized to certain devices or operating systems. As things become more and more embedded to be seamless on the device, it creates really kind of complex problems to track. These could be bad validation code on the client side, or they could be other things, and they result in elevated error rates or issues with the vendor that specifically impact your customers on the device that your backend service monitoring would never see. You could also see order failures because of just odd state mismatches. In fact, I had this happening just the other day. I was going to check in for a flight, and I hadn't been assigned a seat. But every time I would open up the seats panel, I would see there were a couple of seats available for me to select. I would go select it, and by the time it would process through the data, which was very slow because my connectivity inside the airport wasn't great, I would get a message indicating the seat was no longer available. And frustratingly, I would go back into the seats and see the exact same thing. So like it's impossible for me to tell whether it's not available because I wasn't fast enough selecting it, because it wasn't actually available, etc. But either way, my app had a different state than the service that was processing it. And these state mismatches occur when the app thinks that your item, it can do something, but your backend service doesn't. And so, an example could be an out of stock item during a flash sale where I've selected it in my app and then I have a long running request or something else going on that results in the item not existing when the service tries to process it. And this is ultimately a 400 error, right? Like it's going to validate the cart and say this product's not available and kick a message back to my mobile app to process. And it's a validation error, more or less. But in reality, it's an inventory data syncing issue and becomes an application design problem, not something that you can easily monitor. Another source of huge challenges is third-party vendors. Almost, every mobile experience has at least some SDKs, and many of them rely on third-party code to capture analytics, like Embrace or user analytics. You've likely seen those SDKs or implemented them, serve ads or provide other core functionality. So what are those problems? Ultimately, it's that your backend doesn't know about the endpoints you don't own. If you have ad vendors that hog your network bandwidth or block your UI or cause crashes, you're losing revenue and user goodwill and might not even know it. There's no transaction to alert on when this SDK starts doing something that's blocking a thread inside your app. You need bespoke observability that will actually look at the request from the client side and that you can evaluate independent of your backend monitoring. We also see issues with video. You can get customer complaints because of bad video quality, and that could ultimately be an issue with the user's network. Either they weren't able to download video segments fast enough to actually prevent buffering, but it could also be an issue with the client where you're attempting to get a bit rate that would never work on the customer's device or network conditions. It could be an issue with their device, just either being slow to download the segments or slow to process them, something server side or even with a CDN. And without that complete picture of what's happening in both the backend as well as the mobile device, you're likely not to know the answer. And then on analytics side, if you use several analytics vendors, you could have capture and data transmission inefficient. And it could lead to a lot of bandwidth consumption or data consumption. This can impact performance of the app itself, depending upon how many SDKs are at play, but it could also impact customer satisfaction with your app. If you're loading it up with lots of data transmission and your users generally don't use your app on Wi-Fi, that impacts their data usage rates. It could impact performance of other things they have going on their phone, etc. So let's talk about a couple examples here because I really like real-world case studies. So the first case study is a major US airline. And the question here is, how can you discover where users are dropping out of your funnels and why? For example, you could easily have no crashes or errors and still lose tons of users due to application performance issues inside your mobile app. And so in this example, a major US airline had a challenge with their checkout process. To book a flight, you must pick a seat, obviously. So I say I want this flight, now it tells me to pick a seat during the checkout process. So I got past flight selection, and the seat selection process results in what appeared to be an infinite spinner. It's just sitting there spinning. If this process is hideously slow, you're going to see a drop off in people successfully completing ticket purchases. Nothing's absolutely wrong here. There's no crashes or errors. It's not fatally crashing the app dropping altogether. The HTTP requests aren't even failing. But you need to uncover the impact of this issue to your business and have that data needed to characterize and understand the problem so it can be fixed. And this is impactful because if you start looking at your conversion rate and your product team probably has user analytics or funnel analytics elsewhere, they'll wonder why people aren't choosing their seats. There's a variety of reasons this could be, like the seat selection process could be super confusing. But in this situation, the product analytics won't show that the aggregate network calls, let's say you've designed to make 15 or 20 different individual calls to maybe get the aircraft type and therefore the seat map, get available seats, pricing, you get the idea. They were all just in aggregate taking too long and causing a spinner. It won't show that customers were frustrated and forced quit the mobile app because it was just spinning. And so, they might have come back and completed this purchase later, but in reality, this resulted in real missed revenue because at that point in time, a customer had the intent of making a buying decision and didn't. The case study number 2 is a really interesting one, and this is a global hotel chain that discovered that a seemingly innocuous problem, which in this case was missing images, ended up with a ton of lost opportunity. So in this situation, inside the mobile app, after you kind of selected a particular hotel and even a room, you would go through and you could look at a carousel of room images. But in this situation, it wasn't loading all available room images. It was a 404. The images were just not found at the destination where the app was trying to talk to. And in this case, there was a precipitous decline in checkout rates for users that experienced this particular issue, resulting in millions of dollars of lost revenue. There was no error making a purchase for the customers who successfully converted. And in fact, that all looked totally fine on the server side. But the failure in the network calls at the point before I even made the explicit intent to go reserve the room were resulting in a massive decline in checkouts for these particular hotels. So, if you were looking at these individually as a percentage of all of your HTTP requests to your image server, it probably would seem like it has minimal impact. But to these particular hotels and room types, the impact was actually quite substantial. And in actuality, customers were even forced closing the app and abandoning entirely because of this, and it added up to over $1.8 million in missed bookings. And so you want your mobile team to be able to proactively find those needles in the haystack, and as a result, deliver a big impact to your business. So now let's talk about the top 5 objectives to pursue and promote product optimization and innovation. Every company that's heavily invested in the success of their mobile initiatives needs to answer key technical and business questions across a variety of dimensions. It's not enough to track crashes. You want visibility into what's causing the largest impact on your business. So here are the top 5 objectives you should pursue in your mobile data strategy so that you can create the best product and innovate quickly. The first objective is to understand complete user experiences. Your mobile app's not a service being called from a server to query data. It's a complex journey across screens. It has taps. There are many user engagement points where they might background or foreground the app and engage with it differently. There's changes in connectivity. Maybe I'm using your app as I walk down the street and I switch from a Wi-Fi network that I know to being on my telecom provider's network. And there's even more. And building resiliency comes down to understanding what's actually happening in the wild and not relying on just errors or crashes to reveal the true extent of actual problems. So some questions to ask your current observability solution. How would it surface problems that happen in the absence of known errors, such as slowness or optimizing perceived performance? Do you have helpful dialogues when users lose connectivity to encourage them to stick around? How do you know these types of things exist? You have to know to find these opportunities. How would it highlight the largest revenue leaks? Can you segment your user performance or effects on geography or persona to know who's impacted instead of just the number of raw events that it occurred? Could you even specify certain regions or devices that have maybe a smaller impact, but it's known? And how would you show which user segments are the most impacted by failures? Generally speaking, backend observability is going to be service focused as opposed to user focused. Can you provide segmentation impact? Can you show first-time user experience struggling to onboard, or power users struggling with some sort of behavior, such as downloading too many videos or images and causing memory issues and therefore crashes? The second objective we're going to talk about is making informed decisions in real time. Mobile's compiled code running on devices you don't own. They're unmanaged by you. And making big changes requires going through an app store approval process. But there are many ways to mitigate risk and limit the impact of regressions by having actionable data and insights in real time. And so some questions to ask your current observability solution are, how quickly can you identify a bad release and pause a rollout? If you have data delays up to 24 hours, you certainly can't make real-time decisions. Can you reduce impact by reducing the users your bad release reaches? And if you're doing that with feature flagging, do you have real-time data to make those feature flag decisions? And how can you effectively run experiments on new features, A/B tests and promotions, right? If you have A/B tests on there, do you have real time to make decisions on whether to turn them on or off based on the behavior you're seeing from your users? And can you optimize your marketing spend by seeing which users kind of hit key milestones, and if not, determine whether or not it's the design of the app or it's a technical issue? And what's the time to identification of third-party vendor issues that are hurting your user experiences? Can you trust that your vendors are being forthcoming about outages? And your vendors don't necessarily know what's going on in your app, so they can't tell you what'll happen between those interactions. They don't have visibility into. Objective number 3 here is to create effective data sharing across teams. And we talked a little bit about the 50 SDK problem, but 50 different SDKs could potentially mean 50 different places that you're harvesting, storing, querying, and understanding data. While teams need access to the data that matters to them, pulling from a complete data source provides many organization-wide benefits. So some questions to ask your current observability solution are, how many teams make use of the data it provides? Can your mobile teams really make decisions with the data, or is it too lightweight and they have to go use another tool that's free or has part of the picture for them? Are your teams forced to hopscotch between tools to answer key questions? And I mean, we see this a lot where teams will use one tool for crashes and errors. They'll use one for understanding end-to-end tracing. Maybe they'll use a third tool for logging entirely. And they end up piecing together from these uncorrelated pieces of information and determining that there's issues through inference rather than explicit connections. And how difficult is it to prioritize issues from raw counts of individual events? Are you just seeing occurrences, or are you seeing impacted users? Are you able to segment this to whether or not it's a group of customers who are high value or not? And how often are you discovering issues because of customer complaints rather than proactively? Objective number 4 here is prioritizing based on user outcomes. Chasing issues based on frequency alone is like a costly guessing game. You might have a failure in your backend systems that doesn't break a threshold to initiate an investigation, but that failure alone, limited to your mobile app, could translate to millions of dollars in lost revenue if left unaddressed. So you want to be able to track issues based on their business impact, which requires knowing how your users are responding. So some questions here, are how do you know which issues in your backend translate to revenue impacting issues in mobile? Slow response times could lead to something that doesn't really matter, but they could also lead to drop off and forced closes and therefore missed opportunities. How would you pick which issue to fix, a slow network call or a failing one? You can't just look at raw numbers there, because you might determine failing one is the obvious one. But in terms of user impact, when they're not in a vacuum, it might determine that, or you might determine that your initial thinking was wrong. And how would you identify optimization opportunities that don't stem from a known failure? Reduced engagement, because users are spending less time in your app because of technical issues or other issues, or reduced interaction with high value areas because of known issues within your app. Objective 5 here is to discover actionable insights across key segments. And so, what's interesting about mobile is every device is actually a user, and no two experiences are identical. You really have this kind of unlimited cardinality problem, but you need effective ways to compare performance across segmentation, like features, releases, regions, or user personas, so you can make decisions on prioritization of changes or improvements with areas with the highest ROI. So some questions here, like, do you know where you need to make app changes in order to cater to certain devices, connectivity, situations, users, or regions? What about a market launch in a new country that has primarily older Android devices as opposed to your current users that might be US-centric on newer iPhones? What about launching in a country without strong Wi-Fi? Do you know whether an issue is worth fixing or not based on the user segment? Is login access for subscribers more important than for free users? Probably. And power users could have the worst experiences. And do you know where to invest your roadmap? Are you making decisions based on actual value and impact to users you care about rather than just counts? Let's talk about how the future of mobile will unlock workforce productivity and revenue potential. The good news is that you invest effectively into your mobile initiatives, there's incredible value to delivering a stellar mobile experience. Whether it's your primary touch point now because you were born mobile, or it will be in the future, we've only begun to see the ways that mobile will continue to permeate our daily lives. So let's talk about the growth of mobile across new platforms. Today, like most people will associate mobile with a mobile phone. And it really started with apps and smartphones. But today, you see in the ecosystem, apps run on TVs, watches, bikes, cars, and we haven't seen third-party app development really skyrocket for a variety of reasons for many of these. But there's a question around what the future of voice apps will look like on smart assistants like Alexa. What is the ecosystem going to look like on car consoles for finding a hotel, restaurant, gas stations, and excursions while on the road? And what will they look like on smart TVs? Will you not just purchasing movies, but will people interact with a educational app through a connected smart assistant? What about IoT? Will smart buildings look different in the future? Will there be apps that you interact with through devices to control lighting or appliances? Will we see adoption of truly keyless experiences at work or just, today we see it starting a car with Tesla. What's the next innovation in wearables? Better health monitoring solutions. We are definitely seeing an explosion in the exercise segment, which is really interesting, the difference between kind of the IoT experience and the app experience and how they pair. The future of AR, VR. What's the metaverse going to look like? Will your brand expand into virtual experiences or application-like experiences? They could be trying on outfits or testing out a product without needing to visit a store. You could have virtual open houses, and not just gaming, but how will the kind of the physical sensation of these fantasy experiences continue to expand? And what's the future of in-store? What friction will mobile devices or various things you put into your retail experiences, how will they change that experience? We've seen Amazon Go revolutionize contactless convenience, but what's next? What about a restaurant, gas station, parking meter, etc., that could interact with you? So we're going to really continue to see mobile create seamless experiences between businesses and customers. There are plenty of opportunities, and the companies that invest wisely could become leaders in brand loyalty and engagement through these new digital touch points. And so what will you need to succeed? What data will you need to succeed? We really believe in a single source of truth. This single source of truth needs to have the highest cardinality available with that mobile telemetry data to really be able to understand what's happening with these unmanaged devices with near limitless user connectivity, version, and OS variables. We think you need visibility into more complex failure types. Unlike the defined boundaries of troubleshooting a microservice, a mobile issue can stem from really anything. It could be a broken UI, code in the broken UI, but it could also be UI behavior because of latency. It could be missing data, an unhandled connectivity switch, a device-side timeout, and more. And if a crash is happening in your app, is it due to just bad code in that area, or the result of the path the user took to get there? Are you kind of trying to figure out whether an issue is because of a technical issue or a user behavioral issue, and how are you able to unify that to tell what happened just before a crash? Are you having to look at other data sources that are roughly uncorrelated? And you need to associate failures with user outcomes. You shouldn't be determining issue prioritization by metrics alone. You might miss business impacting issues that elude traditional monitoring approaches. Again, what's more important to fix? This particular login error for a segment of customers you maybe don't care about, or a failed image load in your UI for customers that are at the critical point of making a buying decision. Your traditional intuition might not be clear if you don't have the ability to ask the right questions. And so you need the visibility into what the business outcomes are across your entire population in order to prioritize the most valuable optimization opportunities. You could be monitoring user actions with automated insights, highlighting pain points. And you could also be, detecting lag early to proactively avoid negative feedback and drops in the App Store rankings with things like application not responding issues on Android. So finally, let's talk a little bit about the X factor we think you need to succeed in a mobile-first world. And I'll say, Embrace is not an observability platform built for backend systems or cloud-native architectures, but we are the observability and data analytics solution for mobile. And, we think that we're special. We're a mobile-centric data analytics and observability company that drives optimal business decisions. We've talked a lot about cardinality, and one of the things that makes us unique is that we collect 100% of the data from 100% of user sessions. So every time your user engages with their app for your brand, we will collect data on what happened. We track metrics across all segments with the facetability of what happened in a particular region or device type, a particular feature or release, an app version. And we provide a proactive alerting to reduce issue resolution timelines. I mentioned, are you relying on that backend alerting that might be across all tenants? Or do you have your own solution to help your teams understand when they need to flip a feature flag or proactively poke the service team because of an issue impacting your app? We monitor full user experiences, and we think that opens up powerful debugging possibilities. We are a session-based observability platform rather than just raw events. We think raw event or raw metric data collection is kind of just a bag of data. It's uncorrelated to what your users are actually doing when they engage with your app. We like to solve for issues that are unknown rather than just known issues where you're kind of predetermining what issues you're looking for. And it's really from a mobile first perspective. That session-based monitoring gives you that complete technical and behavioral data that's unique to mobile devices, the right context based on user behavior and technical activity that's happening to solve both known and unknown issues. And it's built for mobile, so we talk in that language. So why do we think Embrace is the best solution for mobile? We think we go beyond issues. We answer any question you might have, whether it's not just crashes and errors, it could be performance issues, or it could be behavioral issues. We go beyond looking for raw events and draw insights for complete user experiences. We create this cool stitched session experience so that you get a complete picture of an actual user interaction across a period of time. And we help you understand your customer's mobile experience from the user's perspective. Where and why did they take a particular action? And how did that correlate to the issue you're investigating? Or did you discover something new because of it? And what's cool about Embrace is that we're unsampled, which means you aren't operating from limited data, assumptions, or guesswork. When you ask a question, you can know the exact impact of any regression across every segment you care about. You can easily navigate from any aggregate metric that we present for ease of human consumption down into the complete details of every affected session. And for any session, you can see the aggregate metrics for any failures or slowdowns in terms of user impact. And that's opposed to other solutions that might just give you a bunch of aggregate metrics and then that bag of data. So they tell you you have a higher error rate, and then they just give you a bunch of error logs. But when you actually go to see what led up to that particular error, you're really missing context. And sometimes they even tell you to go use other solutions to stitch it all together. So let's talk about what Embrace's mobile observability data does in practice. And so I'm going to walk through a common use case, and we've all probably had this happen to us. It could be the CEO sending you a Slack about a specific user who's a friend of theirs, or in this case, it's a customer complaint on social media. You know, if there's a complaint on social media, the App Store, email, or customer support, with Embrace, we give you the fastest way to understand what the problem is and whether it impacts other users in your business and whether it's worth solving. So it doesn't really matter where the complaint came in. In this case, we're going to walk through a social media example, but you know, it could be any of those. And you know, it could be that CS saw it and said, okay, here's the particular ticket. It could be that product tried it out and couldn't do it. It could be that engineering received a ticket. But in this case, social media. Bob here says he can't purchase the daily deal in our mobile app. What gives? So in this scenario, we can go directly from the user complaint to what happened in Bob's session by searching for their unique ID that you've assigned to that user. So here you find Bob customers information in your own system, or maybe they got some other unique piece of information when your social media team got a direct message. And then you look up Bob and find there's a unique ID that you assign and Embrace that's unique to Bob. You can get all sessions for Bob, and you can specifically filter and facet really in any way. But in this scenario, you know, we're collecting a ton of data about Bob's sessions. So we do real-time access to every session that Bob had within Embrace. I will note that we're GDPR compliant. We don't collect PII. But we've entered Bob's unique identifier from our system, and now we can see every one of Bob's sessions and see which ones even had negative experiences. You'll see there's an issue up top. You can identify if it had an error, like a failing network call, crashes, terminated by the user, etc. And this first one has the failing network calls. So we're going to go take a look. So you'll notice when we click into that session, we get full details about exactly what happened when Bob engaged with our app. So he launched the app and headed to a daily deal screen. You see that right here. We opened up the view, daily deals activity. And he attempted to click one to purchase, but was unable to because of a 403. It was forbidden. It could be an authentication problem or something else is going on the server side. Happened quite a bit, and you know, maybe your backend system didn't even look for this particular error code. So how would you service these? And before we invest any like particular time in this, we want to determine whether this is a widespread problem for all customers using the mobile app hitting this particular endpoint, or whether it's limited to Bob, because I don't want to go have teams woken up in the middle of the night or in a frenzy if for some reason this is just limited to him. And so we're going to click the See Impact button, which allows us to look at the overall impact of this particular request to that endpoint and whether it's failing, you know, more broadly. And wow, so this endpoint is failing a lot. It's failing just over 362,000 times, almost 363,000 times within just the last day. And so that's a lot of times that you've had network requests for that daily deal that customers were unable to purchase. And maybe as a percentage of all of the things that we sell, it's not a huge deal. So we didn't notice a huge downturn in overall impact, but maybe it was a pretty huge impact, and you need to be able to determine that, you know, this is an issue you need to resolve immediately. And so for any endpoint, you know, Embrace shows the type of error, whether it's a 400, 500, connection errors, etc. And that allows you, you know, to really see network calls that never leave the device. And you can even go now from this and go look at all sessions that were impacted by this particular problem. This is the only solution where you can go from any failure, such as a crash, error, failing network call, out of memory, application not responding, or even poor user experience revealed through a user complaint, like we did here, immediately dive into their technical details, then go to impact, and then see all affected sessions so that you can kind of commonly understand the details that lead you to the resolution time. And you've just seen this one powerful debugging flow. We looked up a user, we saw a bad session, we discovered the failure, user impact, and then every session that helped so that we could resolve it. And that's just one powerful example of how we can help you identify and solve these seemingly small issues that can end up having large revenue impacts on your system. So to wrap it up, we have a couple of key takeaways. If mobile is the future of your business, then you need monitoring that is built for mobile. We're asking more of our mobile devices, including richer, faster, more seamless experiences today, and that means more opportunity and more risk. But the businesses that are unable to answer key questions because they don't have the right type of data will see more risk than the ability to harness the opportunity. And Embrace here is redefining what observability means in the age of mobile, and we think answers a ton of questions our customers need to answer to really harness that opportunity. Thank you.